There is a place in Earth's oceans where sunlight never arrives, where pressure crushes, where oxygen is so scarce that most life suffocates long before reaching it, and yet, something thrives there, something ancient, something misunderstood, something that looks like it crawled out of a nightmare rather than evolved through millions of years of natural selection, a creature with glowing eyes, a cloak-like webbing, and a name that sounds like it belongs in folklore rather than biology, the vampire squid, a being so strange that for decades scientists didn't even know where to place it on the tree of life, hovering between octopus and squid like a ghost of evolution itself, and if you were to encounter it in the darkness of the deep sea, suspended silently in water colder than ice, you might think you were looking at something supernatural, something that doesn't belong to our world at all, because everything about it feels wrong in the most fascinating way. The vampire squid, scientifically known as Vampyroteuthis infernalis, translates quite literally to vampire squid from hell, a name that conjures images of blood-drinking predators lurking in the abyss, but the truth, as unsettling as it is even stranger than fiction, because this creature does not hunt in the way you expect, it does not chase prey through the dark, it does not tear flesh or drain blood. Instead it drifts, patiently, silently, almost lazily, as if it has adapted to a world where energy is more valuable than aggression, a world where every movement could mean death by exhaustion, because down here, in what scientists call the oxygen minimum zone, life exists on the very edge of possibility, and survival depends not on speed or strength, but on efficiency so precise it almost feels like strategy. Imagine descending thousands of meters beneath the surface, leaving behind the last traces of blue light, entering a void where visibility disappears entirely, where the water becomes thick with darkness, and in that void, a pair of large, luminous eyes suddenly opens, reflecting what little bioluminescence flickers in the distance, eyes proportionally among the largest in the animal kingdom, designed not for hunting, but for detecting the faintest signals of life in a place where even a single photon matters, and surrounding those eyes, a body that looks almost delicate, soft, and gelatinous, colored in deep reds and blacks that render it nearly invisible in the abyss, because at such depths, red light doesn't exist, meaning anything red becomes effectively black, a perfect camouflage in a world built entirely on darkness. But what makes the vampire squid truly unsettling is not just how it looks, but how it reveals itself when threatened, because unlike most creatures that flee or fight, this animal performs something that scientists have come to call the pineapple posture, a defensive display so bizarre that it seems almost theatrical, where it inverts its webbed arms over its body, exposing rows of spiny projections called cirri, transforming itself into something that looks less like an animal and more like a living, spiked sphere, an illusion of danger designed to confuse predators in a place where hesitation can mean survival, and as it curls into this form, it may release clouds of glowing particles, bioluminescent mucus that lingers in the water like ghostly fireworks, distracting anything that dares to approach, turning the darkness itself into a weapon. And yet, despite all of this, despite the intimidating name, the eerie appearance, the almost alien defenses, the vampire squid is not a monster in the way we instinctively imagine, because it does not drink blood, it does not stalk victims. It is, in fact, one of the most passive survivors in one of the harshest environments on Earth, feeding primarily on what scientists call marine snow, a constant rain of organic debris that drifts down from the upper layers of the ocean, composed of dead plankton, fecal matter, and microscopic remains of life far above. And while that might sound unremarkable, even mundane, it is actually a brilliant evolutionary strategy, because in a place where food is scarce and energy is everything, the vampire squid has chosen not to compete, but to collect, using long, filament-like appendages to gather particles from the water, conserving energy in a way that predators simply cannot afford. This is what makes it so fascinating, because it challenges everything we think we know about survival in extreme environments. Instead of evolving into a faster, more aggressive hunter, it has become something quieter, something more patient, something that thrives not by dominating its ecosystem, but by adapting to its limitations so perfectly that it no longer needs to struggle in the same way. And this raises a deeper question about evolution itself, about whether success is always about power, or whether sometimes the most effective strategy is to simply endure, to exist in harmony with the constraints of your world rather than trying to overcome them. For decades, the vampire squid confused scientists because it didn't quite fit anywhere. It has characteristics of both squids and octopuses, yet it belongs fully to neither group, representing its own unique lineage, a living relic of an ancient branch of cephalopods that diverged hundreds of millions of years ago, long before many modern marine animals even existed, meaning that when you look at this creature, you are not just seeing something strange, you are seeing a piece of evolutionary history, a snapshot of a world that no longer exists, preserved in the deep ocean where change happens slowly, where extinction does not always reach, where ancient forms can survive long after their relatives have vanished from the planet's surface. And maybe that's what makes the vampire squid truly terrifying, not its appearance, not its name, not even its strange behaviors, but the idea that it represents a version of life that we barely understand, a reminder that the deep ocean is not just unexplored, but fundamentally different from the environments we are familiar with, operating under rules that challenge our assumptions about biology, about survival, about what it even means to be alive, because in the darkness below, evolution has taken paths that seem almost unimaginable, creating creatures that feel less like products of nature and more like something out of a distant, alien world. And as we begin to understand more about this mysterious being, as scientists send submersibles deeper into the ocean, capturing glimpses of its slow, drifting movements, its glowing defenses, its silent existence in a place where almost nothing else can survive, we are forced to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the vampire squid is not an anomaly, it is not an exception, it is simply one example of what happens when life is pushed to its limits, when survival becomes less about competition and more about adaptation. And if such a creature can exist here on Earth, hidden in the darkness beneath our oceans, then what else might be waiting in the places we have yet to explore? And to understand why the vampire squid is not just strange but almost impossibly efficient, you have to step deeper into its world, into a region of the ocean that most animals actively avoid, a place known as the oxygen minimum zone, where oxygen levels drop so low that even highly adapted fish struggle to survive, where metabolism becomes a life-or-death equation, and every movement must be calculated with ruthless precision, because here, energy is not just scarce, it is everything, and this is where Vampyroteuthis infernalis has mastered a strategy so refined that it almost feels like cheating the rules of biology itself, because unlike nearly all other cephalopods, which are known for their intelligence, speed, and active hunting, this creature has slowed its entire existence down to a near standstill, evolving one of the lowest metabolic rates ever recorded among complex animals, allowing it to survive in conditions that would suffocate most of its relatives within minutes. Its blood, if you can even call it that in the way we understand, contains a unique form of hemocyanin, a copper-based oxygen-carrying molecule that is far more efficient at binding oxygen in low concentrations than the hemoglobin found in our own bodies, and this adaptation allows the vampire squid to extract what little oxygen exists in its environment with remarkable efficiency, meaning it doesn't need to constantly move or pump water across its gills like other cephalopods. Instead it can remain suspended almost motionless, conserving energy in a way that feels almost unnatural for a creature that belongs to a group typically associated with rapid bursts of motion and complex predatory behavior, and this single adaptation alone redefines what it means to be a cephalopod, turning a lineage of active hunters into something closer to a drifting observer of the deep. But its physiology goes even further, because the vampire squid lacks something that most squids rely on heavily, ink sacs used for escape, and in their place, it has developed something far more unusual, a defense that transforms the darkness itself into a tool, releasing clouds of sticky, bioluminescent mucus that can glow for several minutes, creating a floating distraction that confuses predators long enough for the squid to drift away, not in a rapid jet-propelled escape, but in a slow, deliberate retreat, because jet propulsion, while effective, is incredibly energy-intensive, and in a place where every calorie matters, even escape must be efficient, and so instead of outrunning danger, the vampire squid outlasts it, relying on confusion rather than speed. Its body is also structured in a way that reflects this philosophy of conservation, with a gelatinous consistency that reduces density, allowing it to achieve near-neutral buoyancy without constant effort, meaning it can hover in the water column without sinking or swimming, a passive existence that minimizes energy expenditure, and extending from its body are two extraordinarily long, retractable filaments. Unlike the typical arms or tentacles seen in other cephalopods, these filaments can extend to many times the length of its body, acting almost like delicate fishing lines drifting through the water, and when they encounter particles of marine snow, tiny bits of organic debris falling from above, the squid reels them in, using mucus to trap and transport the material to its mouth, effectively turning the ocean into a slow-moving buffet where it doesn't need to chase anything at all. And this feeding strategy, as simple as it might sound, is actually one of the most important evolutionary innovations in the deep sea, because instead of competing with predators for limited prey, the vampire squid has moved into a completely different ecological niche, one that is largely uncontested, feeding on what others ignore, and in doing so, it has eliminated the need for speed, aggression, and high energy consumption, becoming something that exists outside the typical predator-prey dynamics, a collector rather than a hunter, a survivor that thrives not by overpowering its environment, but by understanding it. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of this creature is how it deals with threat, because in a world where escape is costly and confrontation is dangerous, the vampire squid has evolved a series of behaviors that blur the line between biology and illusion, and one of the most extreme of these is something known as autotomy, the ability to deliberately shed parts of its own body, specifically the tips of its arms, which can continue to wriggle and glow after being detached, acting as a living decoy that draws attention away from the squid itself, a sacrifice that seems drastic, almost desperate, but in an environment where survival odds are razor-thin, losing a piece of yourself is a small price to pay for staying alive, and over time, these lost parts can regenerate, making it a renewable defense in a place where second chances are rare. And then there are its eyes, those large, luminous structures that dominate its small body, capable of detecting the faintest traces of light in near-total darkness. But what's even more fascinating is how sensitive they are to bioluminescence, because in the deep sea, light is not just illumination, it is communication, it is camouflage, it is deception, and the vampire squid's ability to interpret these signals allows it to navigate a world where visibility is measured not in meters, but in flashes, in brief pulses of light that can mean food, danger, or nothing at all, and this sensitivity turns its environment into something almost alive with information, a network of signals constantly shifting in the dark. Despite all of these extraordinary adaptations, reproduction remains one of the least understood aspects of its biology, but what scientists have observed suggests a strategy as unusual as everything else about it. Unlike many cephalopods that reproduce once and die shortly after, the vampire squid appears capable of multiple reproductive cycles over its lifetime, releasing small batches of eggs intermittently rather than all at once, a strategy that spreads risk over time, increasing the chances that at least some offspring will survive in an environment where conditions can change unpredictably. And this again reflects its overarching approach to survival, not putting everything into one high-risk event, but distributing effort in a way that maximizes long-term success. And when you piece all of this together, the physiology, the behavior, the environment, what emerges is not a monster, but a masterclass in evolutionary efficiency, a creature that has stripped away everything unnecessary, everything wasteful, refining itself into something that can exist where almost nothing else can, and this forces us to rethink our assumptions about what makes a species successful, because the vampire squid is not fast, not strong, not particularly aggressive, and yet it has persisted for millions of years in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth, not by dominating it, but by adapting so precisely that it no longer needs to fight against it at all. And perhaps that is the most unsettling realization of all, because when we imagine survival, we often think in terms of power, of competition, of struggle, but the vampire squid suggests something very different, that survival, at its most fundamental level, might not be about winning, but about enduring, about finding a way to exist within the limits of your world so effectively that you become almost invisible to the forces that would otherwise destroy you, and in the silent, lightless depths of the ocean, drifting slowly through a rain of organic debris, this ancient, enigmatic creature continues to do exactly that, existing not as a predator, not as prey, but as something in between, something that has quietly mastered the art of simply surviving. And yet, for all its quiet mastery, for all its evolutionary precision, the story of the vampire squid is not just about survival, it is about time, about persistence across eras that have erased countless other species, because long before humans ever looked into the ocean's depths, long before whales evolved, before many fish took their modern forms, the lineage of Vampyroteuthis infernalis was already drifting through ancient seas, belonging to a group that split from other cephalopods. Hundreds of millions of years ago, a branch that should have, by all expectations, disappeared alongside so many others during the great extinction events that reshaped life on Earth, and yet somehow, against all odds, it remained, not by resisting change, but by avoiding it, by retreating into a part of the world where stability still exists, where the chaos of surface ecosystems barely reaches, where evolution slows into something almost imperceptible. In the deep ocean, there are no forests to burn, no seasons to shift dramatically, no sudden temperature swings like those that drive extinction on land, and so creatures like the vampire squid exist in a kind of suspended history, not unchanged, but less altered, refined slowly over immense stretches of time, and this makes it something rare, a living window into an ancient Earth, a reminder that not all evolution is about rapid transformation. Sometimes it is about finding a balance so perfect that change becomes unnecessary, and in that sense, the vampire squid is not just surviving the present, it is carrying the past within it. But even the deep sea is not as untouchable as it once seemed, because as human activity expands, as climate change alters ocean chemistry, as oxygen levels shift and deep-sea ecosystems begin to feel the ripple effects of a warming planet, the fragile balance that creatures like the vampire squid depend on may begin to change, and this raises a question that feels almost paradoxical. Because while this animal is perfectly adapted to low-oxygen environments, a further decrease in oxygen, or changes in temperature and food availability, could push even it beyond its limits, showing that no adaptation, no matter how refined, is truly immune to disruption, and that even the most isolated corners of our planet are connected in ways we are only beginning to understand. And there is something deeply unsettling about that idea, because the vampire squid has survived mass extinctions, geological upheavals, shifts in ocean chemistry that wiped out entire lineages, and yet it may now face challenges that are faster, more unpredictable, driven not by natural cycles but by human influence, and in that sense, its story becomes more than just a biological curiosity. It becomes a reflection of our own impact, a silent indicator of how far our reach extends, even into the darkest, most remote environments on Earth. But beyond the science, beyond the data and the evolutionary history, there is something almost philosophical about this creature, because it challenges the way we think about life itself, about what it means to exist successfully. The vampire squid does not dominate its environment, it does not compete aggressively, it does not evolve toward greater complexity or intelligence in the way we often celebrate. Instead, it simplifies, it conserves, it adapts inward rather than outward, and in doing so, it reveals a different path, one where survival is not about becoming the strongest or the fastest, but about becoming the most efficient, the most in tune with the limitations of your world. And maybe that is why it feels so unsettling, because it mirrors a truth we don't always like to acknowledge, that life does not always reward excess, that sometimes the most successful strategies are the quiet ones, the ones that go unnoticed, the ones that exist without drawing attention, drifting through the darkness while everything else struggles in the light. And in a world where we often measure success by visibility, by dominance, by constant growth, the vampire squid represents the opposite, a form of existence that is almost invisible, almost forgotten, and yet undeniably enduring. So when we imagine the deep ocean, when we picture its darkness and its mysteries, it is easy to think of monsters, of terrifying predators lurking in the abyss, but the vampire squid tells a different story, one that is perhaps even more profound, because it reminds us that the unknown is not always dangerous in the way we expect. Sometimes it is simply different, operating under rules we have yet to fully understand, and as we continue to explore those depths, sending machines into the darkness, capturing fleeting glimpses of creatures like this, we are not just discovering new forms of life, we are expanding our understanding of what life can be. And somewhere, thousands of meters below the surface, in water so dark it feels endless, a small ancient creature continues to drift, its filaments extended, collecting the slow rain of a world far above, its body barely moving, its existence quiet and deliberate, a survivor not because it conquered its environment, but because it adapted to it so completely that it became a part of it, and in that silent, almost invisible existence, the vampire squid leaves us with a final, unsettling thought. That perhaps the true measure of survival is not how loudly you fight for it, but how seamlessly you